Hello everyone. Today, I'll be replacing the full frame screen from the factory for a customer's LG TV. I invite you all to follow along with the replacement process. To make the atmosphere less dull, I'd like to share some stories I've collected from customers and the internet, so please listen in. Please watch until the end of the video to join me in returning the TV to the customer and enjoy the beautiful scenery along the way. I believe you'll exclaim that it's absolutely stunning. If you have any questions about the repair or replacement process while watching the video, please leave a comment, and we'll do our best to help you solve any issues you're facing. Unexpected encounters on Craigslist. This wasn't that long ago. I didn't even know about the horrible encounters other people had on Craigslist until after this happened. I always thought it was relatively safe, as long as you were cautious enough. Apparently, I didn't follow my own rules, though. This was during the first month I moved into my new home. It was a pretty long move across the country into a relatively new area for me. I sold almost everything before the move. So, for the first little while, I'd casually scroll through Craigslist whenever I was bored, hoping to find anything I might need, mostly furniture or just things to make the house feel less empty. Before this, I'd actually already found a few things on Craigslist and picked them up with no issues at all. So, I really didn't have much reason to be nervous. One night after work, I happened to scroll by a post of a fairly nice-looking couch. It was almost perfect to what I was hoping to find, a gray sectional sofa that was apparently in great condition, and it was all for a decent price, $200. The guy responded pretty quickly. His name was Brian, and from the text, he seemed like a chill dude. We agreed on the price and started figuring out the plan to meet up. The big issue was that I only had an SUV. It could maybe fit one section of the sofa at a time, and he lived in the next town over, so I'd have to drive there and back multiple times just to get the whole thing to my place. When I mentioned that I didn't have a way to pick up the whole couch at once, he kindly offered to use his pickup truck to drop it off at my place. Of course, I ideally wanted to see it in person before buying it and didn't feel too comfortable giving some random guy my address, but it was just so much more convenient and made a lot more sense to do it this way. And he wasn't pushy or weird about it in any way at all. He genuinely seemed like he was offering a solution. So, after a bit of thinking it over, I agreed. We were set for him to swing by my place at 5:30 on the following day. I went to bed early, and in the morning, I sent him my address, then spent the rest of the day cleaning the other rooms of the house. Once it got closer to 5:30, I stayed in the living room and watched TV, leaving the blinds partially open. Almost at exactly 5:30, I saw headlights coming down the road. A few seconds later, a black pickup truck slowly passed by. As they did, I noticed that there was no couch in the bed of the truck, so I figured it was just a neighbor or something and continued waiting. However, just a few minutes later, that same truck passed by again. It was really strange the way they slowed down, like they were looking at my house or maybe even through the windows as they were passing by. It kind of just gave me an uneasy feeling, but I still figured it was nothing. I sent Brian a text making sure he was still on his way, then continued watching TV. After I sent that text, I didn't see any more trucks passing by outside. Even more strange, though, was that Brian never texted me back. He never showed up or even updated me on anything. At 6:30, an hour passed when he was supposed to be here. I sent another text only for it to not go through, meaning that he blocked my number. I didn't know what went wrong, but overall, I wasn't too concerned and more just bothered that he wasted my time. Maybe he found someone else who'd pay more. Or something else came up and he just didn't want to deal with giving me the bad news, so he ghosted me instead. It happens, I guess. As it got later into the night, I was mostly over it. I had dinner, set up my office room in the house, and chilled in bed watching YouTube for the rest of the night. I don't even remember falling asleep. I think I just passed out in the middle of a video, but I'm pretty sure I was out for at least a couple hours. I woke up in the middle of the night to a really unsettling sound. It was a long wooden creak, which I was absolutely sure was the front door creaking open. I knew it because it always bothered me being the only squeaky door in the house. But who the hell just opened it? I sat up and stared toward my bedroom door as I listened. I could hear subtle footsteps moving into the house below me. I probably wouldn't have been able to hear them if not for the echo of the empty home. I felt myself start to panic, but I remained still, almost stuck in place. The footsteps seemed to stop as they reached the bottom of the staircase. Several long seconds of silence went by before a man's voice called out. Not just anything, though. He was calling out my name. His voice was deep and sounded like an older man, but I didn't recognize it as anyone I knew. He called out my name again. Disturbingly, there was no emotion behind it. He was monotone, just saying my name over and over from the bottom of the stairs like he knew I was up here. I quietly reached for my phone to call 911. I was extremely scared that he'd hear me talking to the operator, but honestly, I felt like I had no choice. I whispered as quietly as I could. The man still stayed at the stairs, calling out my name. Once the cops were on the way, I moved from my bed to my closet. I didn't know if the man was actually going to come up to look for me or not. Clearly, something was wrong with him, so I wasn't taking my chances. Only 30 seconds after I moved into the closet, though, the man's voice stopped calling out. From the closet, I couldn't really hear anything else, like footsteps or doors. So, I got really anxious, unsure where he was or if he could be right outside my bedroom right now. Fortunately, in a couple minutes, officers arrived. The house was empty. Whoever that guy was that came in, he was gone. I immediately told the officers about the Craigslist situation because I was sure it had to be Brian. I mean, I'd just given him my address that day and saw that truck suspiciously passing by earlier. I still had his phone number, so I felt confident they could track him down. But there were a few problems. When my messages weren't going through, it turned out it wasn't because he blocked me. It was because that number no longer existed. It was a dead line. There was no way to trace it back to him. And the second issue is that even if we figured out who he was, there wasn't any way to pin him for being the one that broke in. Still, I'm almost 100% sure it was the guy from Craigslist. I wonder if maybe he was planning to have me or whoever responded to his listing go to his place where he was more prepared to do whatever it was he was trying to do. But for some reason, he thought he could still follow through with it at my place by breaking in. Maybe he overestimated himself. I really don't know. It's also really strange that he stayed downstairs and just called out my name. Anyway, the cops said it looked like he picked the lock on my front door, so I replaced it and installed the camera. I didn't really have the option to move, so I'm trying to take any precautions necessary. Nothing has happened since. A meeting that changed locations. Every once in a while, I find myself looking through sites like Craigslist, eBay, and other similar ones for random things I might want or need. It was kind of like online thrifting, just something fun to do and sometimes even got me great deals on stuff I wouldn't have bought otherwise. Some years ago, I had found a few things on Craigslist that I was interested in. The listing showed a bin full of home decor, like candles and picture frames and just cute decorations for around the house. My apartment was pretty bare bones, so I thought a bunch of random decorations could liven up the place. I messaged the woman, April, and she was super kind. Basically, she said she was moving and wanted to sell off all the stuff she didn't want or thought might break during the moving process. Her goal was just to get rid of it all, so she didn't mind selling them for dirt cheap. She said for $20, she'd be happy to let me pick out whatever I wanted or even everything if I wanted all of it. We agreed to meet at a nearby parking lot after she got out of work at 6 o'clock on a Thursday night. I got out of work at 5 o'clock that day, so I just went straight there from the office. The place we agreed on was a parking lot for a grocery store, which was pretty busy around that time. There were a bunch of people coming and going. I texted April what my car looked like and where I was in the lot, then just waited. It was the middle of winter, so I had the car blasting heat and was hoping she'd get here sooner rather than later. But I got a text just a few minutes after I got there saying she was getting out late and was hoping I could possibly meet up closer to her. Obviously, this was a bit frustrating, but she seemed really sorry, and if it ended up saving both of us time, then I guess it wasn't too big of a deal for me to drive a little bit more. April sent over the address to another parking lot that was closer to her, so I just put the address into my GPS and started driving there. I hadn't been over to that side of town very much, so I wasn't sure exactly where it was taking me. The drive was about 15 minutes. Even though it was only about 6:30 when I got there, because it was winter, the sun had already set and it was fairly dark out. But what made it even more dark was that all the buildings in the parking lot had their lights off. Essentially, it was a small lot for an outdoor strip mall, but it was empty and nobody was there except for one car parked on the far edge near the end of the parking spaces. Something felt off about it as I pulled in. April mentioned she had a red Toyota SUV, which was the one car that was parked over there. So, I drove over and parked just a few spaces away. The contrast between the busy public parking lot she chose before to now this deserted empty lot was really strange. I told myself I'd just see how it goes since I was already here. And if anything makes me feel too weird, I'd dip out. I got out and stood by my car waiting for April to get out as well. I realized as I stood there, I couldn't see into her windows. They were maybe tinted, but also the lighting made it difficult to see through. But while I was standing out there in the cold, I started to feel increasingly less comfortable. I was only out there for maybe 15 seconds before I was about to decide to get back in and leave when their door opened. But a man got out. He looked like he was in his 30s with dark hair and a heavy tan winter jacket. He quickly explained that April couldn't make it and was held up at work still, so he was here to give me the stuff from Craigslist. I thought this was super weird and that I would have gotten a text if that was the case. It felt like that information was hidden from me until I'd already showed up. In my hesitation to respond, he also mentioned that because of all the hassle, he'd let me take everything for free if I'd like. He smiled as he opened up the trunk and stepped back, motioning for me to come over and look. I didn't exactly know the best way to leave, but I was sure I was not going to go over there. Maybe if this were all in a more public place, I'd be less skeptical. But out there, where nobody else was around, I was really unsettled. I quickly started going back into my car. As I said, I was just going to call April really quick just to make sure. His smile faded as I walked back and got in my car. I opened my messages, then called April's number. A few seconds later, the muffled sound of a phone ringing came from outside. I looked over. He slowly reached into his pocket and ended the call. My stomach dropped. In an instant, he started hurrying up to my door as I turned my car on and sped out of there. I was almost sure that this was all a setup and there never was anyone named April. It was likely that man behind it the whole time, just pretending to be an innocent woman selling decor in hopes to lure in other girls like me. I can only imagine what would have happened had I gone over toward the open trunk of his car. After that night, I called my sister to talk about what happened, and she told me to call the police. So, I did. However, since nothing really happened, and there's technically no crime for pretending to be a girl named April, although suspicious, they couldn't do anything about it. To me, it's very clear this was a setup that likely had horrifying intentions behind it. I really just hope nobody else fell for it. A toolkit transaction in the night. For the last several years, I've lived a normal life in the city. It's where I stayed pretty much all day, every day. I owned a condo just a couple miles from where I worked, so everything was very convenient, and there was no reason to leave the area. This week, however, I had a couple issues with my condo that were starting to really bother me, and hiring someone to fix them would have been way overpriced. But I had no tools myself. So, to save as much as possible, I went on Craigslist to see if anyone was selling some secondhand toolkits. It was about time I got one, anyway. Surprisingly, there were a ton. Some were worse deals than others, but I just needed some basic stuff. So, I kept looking until I found something that seemed decent, a lightly used toolkit with everything I needed for a respectable price. I sent an email and within just 15 minutes, we were set to meet up. The guy said that I could come by his place and pick it up whenever I was available. I worked until 7, but I usually like to stay up anyway, so I was good with it. His address was pretty far, though, at least for me. It was 45 minutes outside of the city in a very small town that I somehow had never heard of. On the satellite view of maps, it looked like just a 100 or so houses clumped up in one area. Come the following day after work, I made the drive out of the city. The roads were pretty empty and honestly kind of nice once I was away from all the buildings. It was well past sundown when I started getting close. It looked like mostly wooded areas with just a few gas stations and shops around. The neighborhood I pulled into was sketchy to say the least. All the houses were mixed in with the forest and they were clearly very old. They looked like they had been there for over 100 years and really hadn't had any renovations. Some looked abandoned for sure. This had me a little put off as I continued through the wooded road and finally got to the address the guy sent me. It looked no different than all the rest of the homes. Small, old, and barely standing. Although I felt a little uneasy about this neighborhood, it was in the back of my mind that I was very much from the city and wasn't used to places like this. So, I thought it might have not been as bad as I was making it out to be. I parked on the end of the driveway and stepped out. Right away, I noticed how quiet it was. It was so quiet that it felt unnatural. No people outside or sounds coming from any of the houses or even cars driving by, just dead silence. I walked up to the house and knocked on the door. As I stood on the porch and waited, I had this strange feeling that made me keep looking behind me. But after a minute, the door opened. The guy that answered was about average height with longish brown hair and an unkempt beard. He definitely didn't look the most put together. He showed me inside and over to the living room where, sitting on the couch, there was a thick tool bag holding all the tools that he was selling. One thing that made the whole situation feel more eerie was that there were basically no lights on in the house. There was only a single lamp in the living room that barely produced anything more than shadows. Also, as we walked into the living room, I noticed the back door by the hallway was hanging on its hinges, like completely broken in the doorway leading outside. I didn't exactly know what to look for when it came to the kit, but honestly, I just wanted to pay for it and leave. I pretended to look through it, but just pulled my cash out and turned around to hand it to him when I noticed he wasn't there. The room was empty. Where the hell did this guy go? I called out for him, but the house was extremely quiet. There were slight creaks coming from the walls and floors all around the house, but I couldn't tell if it was just the old house settling or not. I felt my adrenaline spiking. I think my gut knew this was really bad. I called out one more time for him. As I slowly made my way back to the front door, leaving the tools behind. Just when I got into the hallway, though, someone was standing there. It was a different guy. I couldn't see him well because he was standing in the shadow, but I could tell he was noticeably taller and wider than the other guy. I was just heading to my car to grab some money, if that's all right, I said casually, hoping he'd just move out of the way and let me go. He didn't answer. The way he was standing was like he was intentionally blocking the hallway. I stood there trying to think of what to do, but just a second later, I heard a creak to my right. I turned my head. The room beside me was pitch black. If I had to guess, I think it was the kitchen. But it was honestly so dark in there that I couldn't tell. Somehow in that moment, my survival instincts just kicked in and I sprinted to the broken back door I remembered seeing. As I ran out of the house, I heard several loud creaks that definitely sounded like footsteps running behind me. Thankfully, the house didn't have a fence, so I was able to just run right around and back to the front. As I was running back up to my car, someone jumped out from behind it and started running away. I didn't know what they were doing, but I knew I had to leave, so I just unlocked it and got in, then floored it out of there. I was still under the adrenaline rush for a while after that. I'm pretty sure there were multiple people in that house and that one of them was trying to either break into my car or prevent it from running so I couldn't get away. I can't say exactly what they intended to do, but if I didn't get out when I did, I'm not confident I ever would have. Story 1: A Strange Melody in the Woods. I go out in the woods just south of the town I live in pretty frequently, at least 4 or 5 times a year. This weekend, I kind of just had that urge to get out and have some time alone. So I quickly filled my backpack and drove down to my favorite trail. I honestly don't know if it was even an actual trail that was marked on maps and all that. Nobody was ever hiking it or camping on it, so I'm really not sure if it was well known. I parked on the side of the road near the trees, got my bag out, and hiked for 2 hours to the end. This part of the woods wasn't mountainous or anything. It was very flat and just densely covered in trees. Great for a chill 1 or 2 day camping trip, but definitely nothing more than that, as it can get kind of boring. The campsite had nothing really to it. There were a few hours until sunset, so I took my time getting everything perfect and starting the campfire. I relaxed and ate some trail mix, just enjoying the warm fire and birds chirping. When the sun got lower, I tossed more sticks in. I always found it interesting how quickly the forest goes from being so alive to almost instantly getting quiet once the sun sets. I sat there and listened to the quietness for only about 25 minutes after dark before a strange sound interrupted the silence. It was music. It was coming from the distance, pretty far away, and it sounded like some old classical song. It almost sounded like an old record player. I stood up and looked in the direction it was coming from. Was there another campsite nearby? Maybe it was a group just casually playing some music, albeit really loudly. I stayed at my campsite and just listened for a while. Had to be 30 minutes at least. But what was so odd and honestly kind of eerie was that the song never changed. It was the same classical song on repeat, filling the void of the silent woods. I'm not one to usually care much if other campers are nearby or having a loud bonfire party or whatever they're doing, but this felt different. Something was off, and I didn't like it. After those 30 minutes, I decided to walk a bit closer just to see what was going on. I didn't want to creep on anyone, but just wanted to make sure it was nothing weird so I'd be able to sleep tonight. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking toward the sound. I felt like I was walking pretty far, which made it even weirder that I could hear it from so far away. The closer I got, though, and the louder the music got, something started to feel really creepy. I could tell I had goosebumps, and my heart was beating a little faster. It was then that I realized I'd only brought my flashlight. I should have brought my pocket knife or pepper spray, but I didn't even think about it. Eventually, I could tell I was getting really close. The music had to be coming from just 30 or 40 feet away, but I couldn't see anything. No bonfire or campfire or light of any kind. And then I saw it. A giant speaker sitting kind of propped up behind a tree. Nothing else was around it. I shined my flashlight everywhere, and there were no signs of anyone. I walked up to the speaker. It looked like an old one from the early 2000s, basically just a giant box with an old LCD display and worn-out buttons to control it. I found the power button and turned it off. Suddenly, the forest was silent. The stark difference was eerie. Who did this? It almost felt like a trap or something. But even then, I made every excuse for it to not be like another camper leaving it behind on accident or, I don't know. Nothing really made sense about it, but I really didn't want to think it was the worst. I didn't stay longer than I had to. I hurried back to my campsite, feeling relieved to see my campfire and get back to what felt like the safety of my camp. However, as the minutes passed, I couldn't shake a strange feeling that loomed over me, like something was still off. But I didn't know what it was. The feeling got worse and worse until I remembered about my knife and pepper spray, thinking that if I kept them nearby, I'd feel safer. But that's when I realized what was off. Things were missing. My matches for starting fires, my cooking utensils, and both my knife and pepper spray, all just gone. My body tensed up. Someone was here. I didn't even have to think for a second longer before packing what was left. And as I did, I heard it again. The music playing from out in the darkness of the woods, closer though, definitely not far out where I'd found it before. I hurried, getting out of the campsite and running down to the trail. As I got further and heard the music fading out, I started to feel a little bit better. Still freaked out, but I thought whoever was out there had to be by the speakers where the music was coming from, which meant I was getting further away from them. I got about 15 minutes down the path, now just walking through the quiet forest far away from any of the music. And that's when I spotted something ahead, laying on the dirt trail. It was my stuff. The knife, pepper spray, utensils, everything that was missing. Someone laid it out perfectly lined up in the middle of the trail. What was the catch? Before I could grab any of it, I heard a flurry of footsteps rushing behind me. I looked back, seeing nothing but darkness. So I just sprinted away, leaving it all behind. I ran for what felt like 10 whole minutes, then continued jogging, fast walking for the rest of the way. Thankfully, I got out of that forest and back to the road. I really can't say what the hell I experienced that night. It feels like somehow I barely managed to escape some psycho. Almost like they were playing with their food. I haven't been back to that forest, and I never plan to. Story 2: The Cabin in the Alaskan Wild. I was solo camping on a trail just an hour north of Fairbanks, Alaska, near the White Mountains mountain range. I'd been at the spot, set up with my tent and everything, for 2 days already. It was just past noon, and I'd made a campfire early, sitting around it and enjoying a meal when a man showed up. It startled me as I hadn't seen anyone or even really any wildlife for the whole 2 days that I'd been out there. I also didn't hear him walking up or even see where he came from, whether it was from the trail or just the wilderness. He looked like your typical camper though, backpack, gear, and everything. And he seemed kind enough. He simply asked if I knew where the cabin was. Although I'd never been to the cabin he was mentioning, I did know what he was talking about. A lot of trails around here have these public shelters, like really small cabins that you can use temporarily along your hikes. Usually they aren't really maintained well and are just on a first-come, first-served basis. During the 2 days I was at this campsite, I saw a separate thin path going into the forest that I assumed led to one of those shelters. I let the man know that if there was a cabin out here, it was probably down there. He thanked me and walked away. I didn't think much more about it. I was just surprised someone else happened to be out here as well. I tended to the fire and relaxed for the rest of the day. This was the last night I planned to stay here before heading back, so I just wanted to enjoy the scenery and calmness. It was probably 9 or 10 in the evening. But around this time of year up in Alaska, the sun doesn't fully set really. It gets dark, but not pitch black like it would in most other places. The sun was at the horizon, casting a shadow over the woods, when out of the trees, I saw someone walking toward me. As they got closer, I saw it was the camper from earlier. I was rightfully confused why he was here, but he explained right away that he couldn't find the shelter. I said maybe there wasn't one. I really didn't know, but the man corrected himself, saying he never found the trail that I was talking about and was hoping I'd show him to it. I thought it was strange he was gone for so long. If he never found the trail, why was he coming back hours later? What was he doing for that whole time if not staying in the shelter? I initially just tried to explain again where the trail was, but he was kind of set on having me lead the way. He sort of guilt-tripped me, saying he didn't have a tent and was relying on that shelter for the night. I felt bad, and even though I didn't want to and found this whole thing a little bit odd, I decided I'd just take him to the path. It wasn't far anyway. I tossed my bag over my shoulders and started leading him there. Where I was sure I'd seen it was maybe a 10-minute walk through the forest. The whole walk there, the guy was pretty quiet. We both just walked without talking much. It felt like something had changed. 10 minutes later though, I found the trail. It was exactly where I said it was. There was no way he could have missed it. And even weirder, I could actually see the shelter far down toward the end of it. Sure, it was far and trees were blocking a good portion of it, but there's just no way he didn't find it from the directions I gave him. We walked a little closer, but the man didn't seem satisfied. I was expecting a thank you or something, but instead he said this wasn't the right cabin. I didn't know what he meant. We kept walking, pretty much going right up to the cabin. It definitely didn't look in good shape, but that's always the risk you take with these sort of public shelters. You really should never rely on them. This one looked worse than most, with broken windows, moldy wood, and just overall like it had been deserted for years. I realized as I was looking at it, the man had gone quiet. I turned around. He had stopped walking, standing maybe 10 feet from me and holding out a knife. His face was stiff and his eyes had a dead stare. He told me in a monotone and emotionless voice to go in. I tried to ask what the hell he was doing, but he told me again without answering to go inside the cabin. My adrenaline was flowing. I was angry that he'd taken advantage of me being helpful, but also scared shitless knowing that I was alone with him out here. I decided going into the cabin was probably the worst option in this case. There was still some distance between us, so I dropped my bag and started running. Weirdly, I didn't hear him chase me. I looked back once I got further into the woods, and he was still just standing there, holding the knife and staring at me. After I got further into the forest, I found a good place to hide, then stayed there for a while, probably 30 minutes. I hoped that was enough time for the guy to leave. Then, in the cover of the dark, I quietly moved through the trees and back to where the shelter was. The man was gone, or at least not standing outside of the cabin like he was before. But my bag was gone too. I thought I was being smart by dropping it so I'd be able to run away faster. But since he didn't chase me, now I felt like maybe it was a bad decision. I had basically everything in that bag. My phone, wallet, keys, literally everything. I quietly left the area and went back toward my campsite. I could feel my heart beating faster as I got closer, just sensing that I wasn't alone still. Then I saw it, the bright glow of a campfire burning right in the middle of my campsite. I thought by now it would have burned out. I walked a little closer, seeing my tent was still up, and from what I could see, the man was nowhere around. It was just the near silent woods with the quiet crackling fire. But then I saw my bag. It was sitting right in the middle of the campsite. Part of me really wanted to run up and grab it, but I also knew this was extremely suspicious. Why'd he bring it back? He must have known I was going to go back to the cabin for my bag. And after not finding it, I'd then go back to the campsite. Even knowing all that and that this had to be too good to be true, I was still about to run up and snatch it when all of a sudden the man appeared. He casually walked out of the darkness behind the campfire, tossing in some more sticks and then sitting down. I could hear him humming to himself too, like he was relaxed and just waiting. I turned around and found the main trail and hiked through the dark all the way back to the road. Took me hours to flag down a car who was willing to help me. I then notified police, and they went out to the forest with rangers in the morning only to find nothing. All my stuff was gone as if it were never there. Even the stones from the campfire were moved and thrown back into the forest like they were trying to cover up that it was ever even a campsite. The rangers also informed me that the cabin out there was discontinued, which just meant that no rangers were taking care of it or servicing it anymore. That encounter had me really uneasy for a long time. I couldn't trust anyone. I've gotten better over time, but I can't help myself from thinking about what might have happened if I'd gone into that deserted shelter or had tried to get my bag. I was likely one bad decision away from never leaving those woods. Story 3: The Stalker in Wyoming. This happened just recently on a backpacking trip. I was on the first one of the summer for me. As far as I was aware, I was going on a very routine backpacking trip through a trail in northeastern Wyoming. The trail was a 2-day hike there and a 2-day hike back the same way. I'd done a ton of trails similar to this, so I went into it thinking it to just be a typical few days. I parked at the empty trailhead and started walking. The first few hours went well. The route was quiet, and I felt like I was making good time. I only had 3 miles left before I'd reach the first campsite, which I'd actually just be passing through and going straight to the next one, 2 miles further, which would be where I'd camp at for that night. Feeling a bit hungry and finding a nice spot for a break, I sat against a tree on the side of the trail and pulled out a snack. I was just taking a breather, only wanting to eat real quick and then get back to walking. But as I sat there, I happened to look up and see something kind of creepy. There was a guy standing in the woods off the other side of the trail, and he was staring at me. Not walking or anything, just staring. I had no idea how long he'd been there for. Almost as soon as I made eye contact with him, he lifted his hand and did this really strange wave, like he was trying to show he was friendly. But the wave was almost robotic. It was just really strange looking and creepy, especially with him standing out there and staring at me. I decided to just stand up and continue down the trail. I was sure he was up to nothing, but I figured it was best to leave anyway. I didn't know why he was off the trail or what he was doing, and as long as I wasn't around him, I didn't care. Those next 3 miles were a little more difficult than I expected, taking me almost 2 hours before I reached the campsite. Like I said, this was the one I was just passing through. But with my break being cut short earlier, I decided to use this as a chance to make a bigger meal and take a longer break before making the final trek to my actual camp for the night. I set my backpack down and took out my mini propane cooker to heat up some water and make my freeze-dried food. I got it to a boil and poured it in. And as I was just waiting for it to cook, I heard footsteps coming down the trail. I looked over. It was the same man I'd seen in the woods. He had short black hair, a medium beard, and a gray flannel with blue jeans, and he looked like he was maybe in his mid-30s to early 40s. As he walked up, I noticed he had a grin on his face, which I assume was supposed to seem friendly, but it definitely didn't. He must have started walking here right after I did for him to get here so soon. As he walked up, he said hello and started small talk, asking about the hike and whatever. I gave short answers, hoping he'd continue along the trail. But my heart sank when he came right up next to me and sat down. He was acting way too friendly, to the point where it felt like he was being aggressively friendly, like there was no way he was genuine. He was really starting to creep me out. I tried to eat my meal quickly, but the guy kept asking me questions about it. At one point, he was jokingly mocking me for eating a quote, homeless meal, and said I needed better nutrition. He tried handing me an open protein bar. I kid you not, he pulled it out of his backpack and the wrapper was already opened, but no bites or anything were taken out of it. I turned it down, obviously, but he was being really pushy about it. Eventually, he gave up though, saying that he was going to be staying the night at this campsite too, so he would give it to me later when I'm hungry. Hearing that was an instant relief. He was staying at this campsite. All I had to do was get out of here. I finished eating, then said my friend was waiting for me at the next campsite, so I had to go. The guy held his smile, but I could tell there was nothing behind it. His whole face was flat. He was just holding this ingenuous smile, and it was really creepy. I walked away, checking back a few times to make sure he didn't follow. I don't know what was up with that guy. Maybe he was just some harmless guy wanting to have a chat. But my gut told me to get away, so that's what I did. Another couple of hours later, I made it to my camp for the night. The sun was already setting, so it was getting pretty dark. And although I was tired, something told me to wait to set up my tent or really unpack anything until later, just in case I had to make a quick exit. Thank God I did, because not 10 minutes later, again, I heard those same footsteps crunching on the leaves down the trail. A moment later, the man showed up, holding that creepy grin that he had before. It definitely wasn't smart of me, but immediately when I saw him, I got really mad. I felt like I'd done everything to get away from this guy. And now I was pissed. He said he was staying at the other camp. So what the hell was he doing here? Stupidly, I straight up asked if he was following me, and I made it clear by the tone of my voice that I was serious. But the guy just jokingly laughed and said, "Yeah, I'm following you," like he was being sarcastic. He still had that stupid, creepy smile across his face. He started asking if I was hungry after all that walking, but I quickly grabbed my bag and ignored him. Walking back the way I came again, I didn't see him immediately follow me. But I knew better than to trust that. I passed the previous camp, exhausted, but continued until I couldn't anymore. I was maybe a mile past the first camp. I moved off the trail. Honestly, I'm not sure how far off I even went. Probably 200 to 300 feet. Then discreetly set up my tent. I left almost everything still in my backpack just in case. Then laid down and tried to sleep. Even with this really disturbing situation, I was so exhausted that I fell asleep surprisingly quickly. But in the middle of the night, my eyes shot open. I could hear footsteps crunching on the leaves right from where the trail was. It had to be him again, walking through the woods in the middle of the night looking for me. The footsteps got closer, but then they started to fade out, moving further down the trail. He didn't see me. I waited until sunrise, then booked it back to my car. Thankfully, I never ran into him again. I don't know where he went after that. Honestly, I think I was disturbingly close to having something really horrifying happen. My encounter with that strange man could have been really bad, as I think he had some pretty nasty intentions. Especially the more I think about the protein bar he tried to give me and just the whole situation. It still makes me sick to think about.